Olenna Tyrell takes her final bow. The Lannisters go on the offensive, and Jon and Daenerys finally meet. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. Particularly if you're a first-time viewer, please do consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. This is my detailed explanation of Season 7, Episode 3 of Game of Thrones, The Queen's Justice. If you have any questions or comments about Episode 3, then please leave them in the comments section below. I'll pick up on these in a second Q&A video later in the week. We open with Jon's arrival at Dragonstone. The reunion with Tyrion is a good one, and you can see already that the respect and friendship between them will be important as the season unfolds. And the respect also seems to be there from the off between Davos and Tyrion. Davos clearly respects Tyrion's masterful defence of King's Landing at the Battle of the Blackwater, even though it led to the death of his son. And the way Tyrion calls him the Onion Knight is very different to how others have. He sees it as a badge of honour, as Davos himself does. Before we move on to the actual meeting of Jon and Daenerys after all this time, we should pause to consider the conversation between Varys and Melisandre. As expected, she has kept out of sight so as not to distract from the proceedings, and now that Jon and Daenerys are together, considers her work to be done for the time being. If she does return to Essos, there's a fair chance that this is the last we will see of her this season, but not the last time we see her in the show. After her crisis of faith last season, she has clearly got her confidence back and is stating very firmly what she thinks will happen. In this case, that both she and Varys will die in Westeros. This sounds ominous, but it isn't really. We've been told many times before, all men must die. But one wonders what she thinks will bring her back to Westeros, and why she needs to go back to Essos first. We do know that she thinks she will meet Arya again, because she told her back in Season 3, and it's more than possible that when this happens, Arya may still want to kill her for what she did to Gendry. So maybe that's it. And what about Varys dying? Well, I suppose he is one of the old guard, one of the original members of the small council, and it would make a lot of sense for the new world, whatever that looks like, to be completely wiped clean of yesterday's ruling class. And of course, Varys' death has been hinted at only last episode when Dany said she would kill him with dragonfire if he ever betrayed her. But let's return to the main event on Dragonstone. Jon and Davos are ushered into the throne room, and it's clear that Dany has thought about how best to appear queenly. Her dragons flew low over Jon and Davos as they approached, forcing them to duck. Missandei solemnly reeled off her many titles, and she herself was seated on the throne, which she has very pointedly not been sitting on so far. In conversation, she repeatedly says that she is the queen, boasts about her birthright and her achievements, and demands that Jon kneel before her in fealty. This is in stark contrast to Jon's approach, who clearly hadn't told Davos to introduce him in any grand way, spends half his time staring at the floor, and the rest of it trying to persuade her of the threat from the White Walkers. He never once tries to convince her of anything on the basis of his own birthright or great achievements, and it's left to Davos to point out that people follow Jon because of who he is, not just because of who his father was. It's interesting that Jon and Davos shy away from saying that Jon himself has come back from the dead. Perhaps they think it is one extraordinary thing too many for people to digest, or perhaps they realise that it's quite a mixed message to send, that they must fight the army of the dead, but that Jon himself has died and come back. Anyway, their first meeting doesn't really end how either of them would want. Jon gets neither dragon glass nor dragon fire, and even if he's not made a prisoner, he isn't allowed to leave either. And Daenerys doesn't get him to kneel. The meeting ends unexpectedly. Dany asserts that she doesn't need any help, but then later hears news of her fleet's destruction at the hands of Euron Greyjoy, so perhaps she will need some help after all. But in the aftermath of the meeting, we see Tyrion at his best, brokering an agreement that Jon can mine the dragonglass and persuading Daenerys that she has little to gain from frustrating a potential ally. But I fear that we may also be seeing the start of Daenerys losing faith in Tyrion, just as we start to see him becoming more and more useful to her. Olenna Tyrell's last words to Dany were not to listen to Tyrion, but to follow her own instincts. And we see him brooding over the fact that the first part of his cunning plan to take Westeros went very wrong. The second part, to take Casterly Rock, is also now shown to be, at best, a Pyrrhic victory. It was symbolic, of course, but the Lannisters didn't lose their whole garrison, and Daenerys does appear to have now lost yet another huge chunk of her navy, leaving the Unsullied isolated on the other side of the continent. So, after following Tyrion's plan to the letter, Daenerys has now lost her Ironborn navy, the Dornish forces and Tyrell forces, and the Unsullied are cut off from her. Even Jon, the man Tyrion told her to trust, is refusing to submit, and Cersei is now looking stronger than ever. In short, Tyrion's plan so far has failed completely. In reality, I would suggest that the only real error here is just not utilising the dragons. If they had supported either Yara's fleet or the Unsullied, Euron's forces would have been destroyed at sea, and the whole situation would be looking very different. But Daenerys is not a particularly forgiving queen, and she will not be content to be cooped up in Dragonstone for much longer. Surely soon her natural instincts will kick in, and she will ride forth to save the Unsullied as they march back home. But I will pick up on this in more detail in my preview video for episode 4. Finally, we should spare a thought for Theon. He has survived Euron's attack along with a handful of Ironborn ships. The question now is what his fellow Ironborn do with him. He has clearly lost any respect they ever had for him, so expect him to be cast down yet again. His hope to achieve some kind of personal redemption through helping Yara to the Salt Throne now seems even further than ever from reality. In King's Landing, we see Euron arriving back with the gifts he has for Cersei, Ellaria and Tyene Sand. Cersei, of course, wastes no time in preparing a particularly cruel fate for them both, Tyene to die from a slow poison, and Ellaria being forced to watch, without being able to do anything about it. It matches what Ellaria did to Myrcella, but still, it's a cruel fate. But zooming back out to the bigger picture, it's becoming clear that Cersei actually seems to be doing quite a good job so far as Queen, in a very realpolitik kind of way. From an unpromising start, she is starting to pull herself into a position where defeat doesn't seem inevitable. She has inflicted major defeats on Daenerys' invasion force, prevented herself from being encircled by enemy forces, managed to persuade Euron to keep on fighting for her by saying that she will marry him when the war is won, and managed to turn a potentially damaging situation with the Iron Bank into a potentially positive one. And it's worth focusing on this last point, because it isn't emphasised in this episode, but there is a lot riding on Cersei being able to get the Iron Bank off her back. The Crown's debts have been a slow-burning plot point throughout the series. Ned Stark was shocked to discover how much debt King Robert had accrued. Tyrion despaired at the state of the accounts. Stannis tried to use it as a way to persuade the Iron Bank to loan him some money. And Cersei dispatched Mace Tyrell to beg for more time to repay. And now Tycho Nestoris, the Iron Bank's representative, has come to King's Landing himself. The problem here is simple. The Iron Throne has a huge debt against its name and cannot repay it because the gold mine beneath Casterly Rock has run dry. And if the Iron Bank doesn't get its money, it will proactively bankroll whoever else they think is in the best position to take the throne. In Westeros, as everywhere else, the real rulers are those with the money. But Cersei's solution is simple. The only other family with enough money to pay off the debt are the Tyrells, and so she sends Jaime off to sack Highgarden. We see here that the Lannister soldiers are loading gold onto wagons. Cersei promised Tycho Nestoris that he would be paid in full in a fortnight, so the next episode will be about getting the gold back to King's Landing. And then we come to Olenna Tyrell's final bow. As you would expect, she faces it with dignity and grace, and more than a few barbed comments. She tries to goad Jaime into some kind of confession, and he does admit that he is in too deep with Cersei and can't really see a way out. He cuts a dispirited figure here, doing his duty, knowing what Cersei has become and trying to temper it, but with his heart not really in it all. When we get to Olenna's final revelation that it was she who poisoned Joffrey, there is barely a flicker of emotion on his face. It means that Tyrion and Sansa are innocent, which will probably gain an added layer of importance whenever Jaime next meets Tyrion, as he surely will. And perhaps this is a flicker of hope for Jaime. He loved Tyrion as a brother, and to know beyond any doubt that he didn't kill Joffrey will make it easier for him to join Tyrion's side when the time comes. In the Citadel, we see that Sam's plan to cover up what he did for Jorah was not to cover it up at all. There is a brief pretense that Jorah was just miraculously cured overnight, but Archmaester Ebrose is not a stupid man and sees through it immediately. It will be interesting to see where this goes. Ebrose is clearly impressed with Sam and willing to overlook his rules breaking, but will he now expect him to just revert back to the menial tasks he was doing before? What happens when he finds out about all the books Sam has been stealing from the restricted area? We do not know. But in the short term, Jorah will presumably be heading off back to Dany, and Sam is finally getting his hands on some ancient manuscripts without having to steal them. What are the odds, I wonder, that one of them will be useful? Finally, with Sam, it's worth drawing attention to the handshake he offers Jorah. Jorah has gone for months, years even, holding himself back from any physical contact. That Sam offers him his hand isn't just a gesture of friendship, it's a moment of human contact that sufferers from contagious diseases can only dream of. Sam is showing Jorah friendship, empathy, and simple human kindness, and you can see how much it means to Jorah. In the north, we see Sansa adapting to her new role as Lady of Winterfell while Jon is away, and from what we see she does seem to be good at it, delegating well and noticing details others have missed. But this is immediately overshadowed by another Stark reunion, as Bran arrives back at Winterfell. Bran has changed more than even any of the other Starks have in the last few years, and it's noticeable that he is virtually expressionless through the reunion. His focus is elsewhere. It could have been an awkward moment. As Sansa points out, he is now the rightful heir to Winterfell. Jon's status at the moment is probably what we would call a constitutional anomaly. He's King of the North by popular acclaim, but no one would dispute that Bran has a better de facto claim. It's another sign that this is the death of the old way of doing things. The heir does not inherit the throne, and the one who does did not seek it, and does not relish the burden. Anyway, all this matters little, because Bran effectively recuses himself from the responsibilities of lordship, because he is now the three-eyed raven, leaving Sansa in charge as she was. And we get a bit of a hint as to how Bran's powers work, because they do seem to be different to in the books. He can see everything that has happened and is happening, everywhere, but it's not yet joined up. They are just fragments. This is an astonishing level of power, and Bran shows a bit of wisdom at last in recognizing that his main task now is trying to learn how to get it all to hang together, rather than just diving into visions and hoping for the best, as he has done so far. We should also take a moment to note the symmetry here between what Littlefinger tells Sansa she needs to fight every battle, everywhere, always in her mind, and what Bran is actually capable of, seeing everything that has happened and is happening all at once. With Bran on her side, Sansa can literally do what Littlefinger can only do figuratively. And the importance of that will grow over the episodes to come. Bran mentions that he needs to tell Jon something, presumably about his parentage, but there are so many other things he can learn, about what Littlefinger did and is doing, what the White Walkers want and where they are, and so on. We've only seen a small fraction of what Bran can do. The episode title is The Queen's Justice, and at first glance it's a bit of a misleading title, for this episode surely is not about justice but about vengeance. We have the Queen of Thorns getting some vengeance by making sure that Cersei knows that she killed Joffrey, and we have Cersei's vengeance against Ellaria Sand for the death of Myrcella. But it leaves an important question in the mind of the viewer. When someone is an absolute ruler, as is the way in Westeros, does their vengeance become justice? Does Ellaria's murder of Myrcella mean that Cersei, as queen, has the right to deal with her as she sees fit, and to have it considered justice? This is the rule of the one, after all, not the many, so the one decides on what is just. It seems wrong to our modern minds, but it is the basis of how Westeros has been ruled for hundreds of years. It's why people play the Game of Thrones. For only one person decides on what is just, and that is the person who sits on the throne. What do you think? What struck you most about episode 3? And do you have any questions for my Q&A video? Please put them in the comments below. If you'd like to support me in producing more videos like this, as well as getting access to more of my content, please click through to my Patreon page. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to know when my next video comes out, then please click on the subscribe button and make sure your notifications are enabled. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.